We are live now. So, a very good afternoon to our esteemed resource person for today, Professor Priyankar Upadhyay, my worthy colleagues, and all the participants who have joined us today for this day one of the 2 week online refresher course on feminist teaching and research in higher education, theory and practice, organized by Teaching Learning Center, Ramanujan College. So today we are extremely privileged to have with us Professor Priyankar Upadhyay, and Sir will be delivering a live lecture on women and international peace. But before I invite you, sir, to give your lecture, I would like to introduce you first with the participants. So, Professor Priyankar Upadhyay has served Banaras Hindu University for over 4 decades in different teaching and research positions. Most remarkable has been his foundational contribution to envision and nurture the Malviya Center for Peace Research at BHU. He currently holds the UNESCO Chair for Peace and Intercultural Understanding and serves on the UNESCO Executive Committee of Interreligious Dialogue and Intercultural Understanding. Professor Upadhyay is on the governing body of Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Institute of Asian Studies, and Presidency University in Kolkata. Professor Upadhyay also holds the most prestigious Global Fellowship of the Peace Research Institute, Oslo. The Jawaharlal Nehru University has recently designated him for the prestigious Rajiv Gandhi Chair for Peace and Disarmament. He is the recipient of many prestigious awards and fellowships, including the Scholar in Residence Award of the Woodrow Wilson Center of International Scholars, WASH DC, Faculty Research Award of the Canadian Government, Senior Fulbright Award, and Australia India Council Senior Fellowship and Advanced International Diploma from Uppsala University. Professor Upadhyay has also served as a visiting professor or senior fellow at Henry L. Stimson Center, Washington, D.C., UN University of Peace and U.S. Air Force Academy at Colorado Springs, Concordia University, Montreal, and more recently at the Dublin City University. He also lectures at the Foreign Service Institute FSI and National Defense College NDC in India and serves as a subject expert in Star News, BBC, and Sahara. We welcome you, sir. I now request you to give your session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nidhi. It's always a pleasure to interact with, through your college, your colleagues and students. I think earlier also I spoke on a different platform, but this college has become quite a favorite of ours in terms of the new academic inputs you are able to bring around, and also because you are able to bring in new and innovative ideas in your academic discourses. So I'm very happy that you have organized this particular call it training or awareness raising programs, inviting experts from different areas to talk about the feminist perspectives. And today, I think I will be focusing on just one aspect of women involvement or women engagement with international relations at large, with international peace, and also as, the women as peacekeepers. So, and my idea is to kind of show that the feminist perspectives have brought a new light to many subjects, many areas, and that were traditionally understood, that were traditionally appreciated without women have to play a role therein. So in short, one can say that feminism, I mean, these are very deep debates about gender and what should be the correct methodology, correct conceptual moorings to describe this whole contributions or role of women. and I will not go there. And I think I leave it to experts to talk about it. And there is, of course, a lot of literature, good literature, that has come up on the subject. I would just say that the feminist perspectives, uh, they offer a historical challenge to the existing postulates about the possibility of change in human nature and human relationship. I repeat, it's a historic opportunity they offer to rethink about human nature and human relationship. And as such, then these perspectives touch upon practically all aspects of human lives and conduct. If you still want even a shorter adjective to describe this phenomena, I would say that the focus on women, the role, the focus on women perspectives has a transformative impact on social sciences, humanities, and the way we look at things. They have challenged the traditional discourses in so many different ways that today I think it's no wonder that we have these women's studies degrees, we have women's studies courses, and there is a very strong focus, especially both nation at the level of national society and international society, on the role of women. I mean, in particular, this I would be talking a little bit extra about it, or in detail about it. The UN Resolution 1325, which says that the women must participate, must be encouraged to participate in decision-making processes in international arena, in international decision-making process, if we have to steer our course towards peace and sustainable development. In short, women's studies, feminist studies, whatever name, this emphasis on gender orchestrated analysis, it has changed the subject matter, it has changed the nature of studies in social sciences and humanities in so many different ways. So today, when we discuss environment, there is always inevitably a focus on women and environment. What traditionally women are seen to be acting differently on the question of environment. And also there is a realization that women are affected also much severely, much decidedly or decisively when it comes to the question of ecology and environment. So you have an integrated approach. I mean, just think about the writings of Vandana Shiva, one of the illustrious figures of contemporary times, and how she and so many others, they interrelate the question of ecology with the question of modern capitalism, with the question of war and peace and rights and so on and so forth. So there is a kind of linkage. There is a new linkage that has come to us, a new knowledge, a new methodology that has been introduced to us through the the emphasis on women. Similarly, and that is today's focus, the focus on women, or the focus on feminist methodologies, perspectives, whatever name you call it, in the field of international relations has been an absolutely a game-changing, if I can say, use the word, phenomena in the studies of international relations, in the studies of peace and conflict resolution also. Now, I will be talking a little bit about this area. Let me first of all say that traditionally the women issues and women agenda, and if you call it women politics, has been conspicuously absent in the study of international relations. I remember, actually, we were still, well, a scholar is always in the process of learning, and he has to retain a curious mind, a young mind. But long decades ago, we were attending an international conference on international relations, international studies conference in UK. And for the first time, I think it was way back uh, in late 80s, that a young woman raised the question that where are women in international politics today? Where are women? I mean, why is it that the relations between nations, is it that the international politics of the day, is it that the question of war, peace, mediation, negotiation, are these issues they exclusively belong to men, or do women have a role to play? This was raised by an outstanding scholar of feminist studies, Anne Tickner, with whom much later I had an occasion of working together. She was a very young, and she raised this issue before the whole conference in the plenary, and I was present. And nobody said anything, but came the reply from a very senior academic. Well, not much to say, in the sense that not far back, it was not visualized, it was never imagined that women could offer a distinct standpoint, a distinct kind of approach to the study of international relations. Now, this was late 80s situation. These scholars like Anne Tickner, and there is so many others. Now, you just Google women in international relations and women in peace, and you'll find illustrious scholarship, both from the Indian academia as well as from international circuits, United Nations in particular. It's an established issue to talk about the role of women in international relations. It's pivotal today to talk about the role of women in peace process. The idea is that women probably can play a more distinctive, more significant role in conflict resolution, whether it is the international conflict resolution or conflict resolution within its own country. There are books and articles which talk about the role of women in peace processes. I mean, for instance, people have written on the Northeast peace processes, the role of Naga mothers, for example. That's one standing out old thing, so I'm mentioning. So in a way, one finds a change in the academic discourses, beginning with the, I should say, 80s or late 80s, fair enough, 90s, 2000. Now, 3 decades plus now, we are 2021, and we see that it's a normal exercise, it's a normal thing to mention about women and peace processes, women and conflict resolution, women and international relations. So then the question arises that why is it that it took so long for academics to discover women, why the women were hidden in international relations? And, people argue that gender and international relations are two mutually exclusive domains. And the argument is that the political process at the international level is gender neutral. It has nothing to do with neutral. And it had much to do with the way these disciplines were orchestrated. There was a time long ago when international relations was described only as international politics. And international politics was seen simply as a struggle of power between the countries. And there were very simple generalization that, especially, I don't know how many young minds and not so young minds would be still interested in Kautilya's Arthashastra or Mahabharata or Hobbes or Machiavelli, and of course the modern protagonist of realist theory, Hans J. Morgenthau, who more or less talked in a similar vein about the international politics being simply a struggle for power. The idea was conceptualized very simply, and I could say very crudely, that human nature is afflicted by two characteristics. One is selfishness, and the other is lust for power. And the argument was that this tendency, human nature, which calls for a struggle for power or which emphasizes a struggle for power, is innate in human nature. So human nature was described as this. And all these developments, by the way, were the product of post-Cold War period, when the world had already gotten in the grip of international rivalry between the Soviet Union erstwhile and the United States, and Cold War, so on. So I'm trying to bring a point that, you see, this is about methodology, that how the question of women, question of feminist contributions or women agency has been embedded in the way these disciplines, mean subjects, these discourses were embedded in the power structures of the day. So Cold War product was this, which said that there is no role of women in this. And then this had also to do with the understanding that international relations is nothing but state-centric. There is this agency known as a state, which is of course conflated with nation, so much so that it's pointless today to ask people the difference between state and nation, because nobody believes in it. But that's a different debate. We'll not go there. But so a state-centric, masculine, power-centric approach to understand the international behavior has been profoundly dominating the scene, and even now they do it. The change that has come about is that there has been counter and alternative vision given by the feminist scholars, and also given by those scholars and activists who may not call themselves as feminists, but they say that without understanding women, without giving proper emphasis on the question of how women look at the situation, it is very, very difficult to understand the political reality. Now, this was the origin of this debate. This was the original, or I should say, foundational reason why women were not considered centrally in the debate. The power-centric approach did not have much patience and continence for human rights. And so this particular thing was decried by a range of scholars, especially the feminist scholar from the Western world. I will not coin the names here. One name I gave you, Ann Tickner. The other name, if you think initially, I mean, these are the people who may not be very popular now, but initially these are the warriors, the women warriors who raised voices against describing international relations as only struggle for power. Nancy Herstock and so many, Hannah Allen. There's so many Western scholars. Not to say that in India we don't have a scholarship, but I think the first um, uh, elements of such reaction, such uh, focus on women approach towards international relations came from these scholars from the West, and mostly they attacked the realist approach which was given by Hans J. Morgenthau. In his famous book, 1948, he wrote a book, International Politics, Struggle for Power, in which it was argued that all nations, all countries are in constant perennial war with each other. And as I described you, that human nature was also described as full of lust for power and selfishness. And they said that, well, so under this situation, uh, power was defined as control of men over men. There were no women in there. They were right. Now, this was a situation that brought the world to the brink of Third World War, as we know. It had led to the Second World War, and now, today, when we look back, it is really, really very, very scary to think that it might be true that after Second World War, uh, there has, technically speaking, no Third World War. But I think we need to realize that in questions of war, in question of violence, we have surpassed. I mean, today's data is horrendous in terms of the human losses, and especially the sort of the atrocities which are committed, which women have to uh, suffer. I'll just mention two examples. One is closer to our border, the 1971 tragedy of that led to the birth of Bangladesh, the decades-long exploitation of eastern flank of Pakistan by the Western military junta, and 1971 saw the worst kind of historically unimaginable atrocities, violence, rapes, displacement, cleansing of the population, and women were the worst sufferer. In fact, there are mind-blowing data about how many women were raped in 1971 by the Western military junta. That's now past, gone. But time to time it recurs. In 1994, if I may recall, in African small country Rwanda, which often is in the news, there was this ethnic violence between the two ethnic communities, Hutsus and Tutsis, and which in just 3 months' time, over 1 million lives were lost. But one has to imagine that the kind of inhuman, barbaric, genocidal violence that was unleashed against women, women's body as the battlefield. That's the argument which was given. Women were raped so brutally that it's because that was the sign of asserting your, superiority. So that happened in 1994. But did the clock stop there? No. Then comes Bosnia and Herzegovina. And then so many parts of the world, we had this tendency of women being exploited, women being brutally treated. In fact, one of the assumption has been that somehow by humiliating women, by raping them, by controlling them, one party scores a psychological victory. So these are the backgrounders. So this is one aspect that we have felt And that has led to a lot of changes in the way thinking in 21st century began as we entered this 21st century with the knowledge that after the end of Cold War in 1990, the world had not become a peaceful place by any reckoning. In fact, it so happened that more lives were lost. In fact, there are suggestions that over 150 million lives were lost, and these lives were not lost in wars between countries and nation states. These lives were lost in violence that is described as civilian violence. And of this phenomena, one could easily see that the worst kind of victims were women and children, of course. And it comes very easy. I remember that during the now almost forgotten Vietnam War, the American forces got into their excitement, or a murderous rage prevailed over a section of US military, and they indiscriminately started firing in a small village known as Maila. Maila village was completely destroyed, and the people who had stayed back were women, mostly women, old people, and children. Hundreds of lives were lost, and similar things have been happening. You feel, it's a feudal thing to believe that if you can punish the women of other party, then you score some kind of victory. So that is one aspect. Now, I will take you to a relationship, an often neglected relationship between international life and national life. Now, we women can be a victim, or should be the frontline victim of any conflict or violence, is something that is rooted in our societal thinking. If you look at the sexual and gender-based violence, as it is known as, it is as much rooted in the psychosocial kind of violence against women. And that is the reason you find that there are very serious studies, and I'm very sure you will have very eminent scholars talking about the psychosocial aspects of what leads to violence against women, or as we describe as GBV. But suffice is to say that the victimhood of women, or I wouldn't say victimhood, the tendency to punish women, to use women, has been as old as sea, and now the world is becoming, the international community has become very conscious of it. And there are a lot of international regimes that are in place. There are a lot of national governments that have passed resolutions, and so on and so forth. But this is one aspect that we can start our story with. Now, when we think about women and international peace, or women and conflict resolution, we think about women as the victims, and as well as the women as the agents of peace building. And this is an aspect in which we would be spending some time before we take questions. So the argument that had started gaining grounds after the deeper realization of how women suffer, perhaps they suffer much more severely than men in a violent situation. It's not as simple as we visualize that, like in olden times, it is shown that the women will put tika on the forehead of their warrior husbands or leaders, whatever, and they will go and die. Because on the back of it, then there was the story of women being looted if the men are not, if they don't return victorious. So the women are either looted, or there are cases when they have preferred to commit suicide, which is of course a very negative thing to happen. Nobody justifies it today. So this cyclic relationship, this vicious circle was unending. But then the realization came that women should be and could be, because of the fact that they are the worst form of victims in a conflict situation, must act as the agents of peace builder also. They can be excellent peace builders because of the fact that they understand in very sensitive, clear terms the negativity of war and violence, whether it is international life or whether it is our national life. It is the women, because they bear the brunt of war and violence, should be and could be, and they are the best hope of peacefulness in the world. So then, from the discourse of victim to the agent of peace building, we have a lot of discourses that are resonating in the world today. Now, on the one hand, you see very interestingly, if you want examples nearer home, in case of Sri Lanka, for many decades, LTTE, the Liberation Tigers, would use women as their frontline warriors. In fact, we have to recall how one of our former Prime Minister, Rajiv Gandhi, was killed by the suicide bomber, a woman. And apart from that, LTT had this regular training sessions. They had these women as their regular, in their regular army, they recruited them. Similarly, we also have examples of the Naxalites often using women or finding women to be the part of their military actions, and sometimes very successfully. In fact, many commanders. Same is the story in Nepal during the Maoist conflict, which almost destroyed peace in Nepal for many long years. We had a very strong role of women warriors. So women can be warriors also. Women can be victims also. The fact is that they can play an equally effective, in fact, much more effective role as the peacemakers is the science of this particular understanding. There is a sense that women, because generally they are respected in the society, more respected in traditional indigenous cultural ways. This is not to say that they are only respected, they are also violated upon. So my argument is not, it's a very complex matrix to understand what goes right and what doesn't go right in our society when it comes to the question of treating women. But women have played, and they have been actually playing a very significant role in building peace also. And the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, it drastically, this is 1325 is a very common knowledge. It increased women's participation in decision making and peace process to a great degree. The argument was the Security Council, the agency, the entity, UN organization in charge of maintaining peace. They said that this 1325 talks about the increased women participation in peace processes. It talks about protection of women and girls in conflict zones. And it also talks about integration of gender perspectives and gender education in peacekeeping. So the idea was very simple. The idea was, which was put in words by the UN Secretary General, who argued that women often have greater access in communities. He's very right. Women often have greater access in the communities we serve, enabling us to improve the protection of civilians, promotion of human rights, and all this enhances overall performance. Yet, and this is the lamentation of UN Secretary General, he says that women continue to represent only 6% of the uniformed military, police, justice, and correction personnel in field missions. So this was a situation which came to knowledge a few years ago. Every day, various agencies of United Nations, they keep us new data, new information. But the fact remains that whether it was the Beijing conference, whether it is various resolution, and in particular 1325 was a major resolution by Security Council, the women were accorded a role of peace builder, realizing a twofold business. They are the worst sufferer. They understand the pain of desertion, displacement, violence. The pain of warfare is felt more succinctly, more poignantly by the women folk, and that is why women should be at the front. So then, as you know, that this peace building business within and outside United Nations is a complex business. 1325 said that women should be there in every layer of the peace process, whether it is the negotiation, whether it is the mediation, whether it is even the peacekeeping operations. Now, as you know, that India and many other countries in South Asia, Bangladesh, and of course Nepal, they send a lot of women peacekeepers abroad. In fact, just last year, if I'm not mistaken, was it 2019? I think 2019, Major Suman Gavani became the first Indian peacekeeper to win a very prestigious, she was acting as a military observer. She mentored over 200 UN military observers on conflict-related sexual violence and ensured the presence of women military observers in each of missions team sites. See, the problem is when UN peacekeepers go to a particular field, or forget about UN, forget about peacekeepers. In ordinary day-to-day life, we don't know what language to speak because many of us, unfortunately, are not sensitized enough about gender issues. They don't know how to deal with a situation of trauma. They don't know how to deal with a situation of a conflict-related sexual violence, whether it is inside your community or internationally. So it's very important for this UN peacekeeping forces actually to be trained in these issues. And Major Suman Gavani, very recently, I think it was last year, but because of COVID, I think it could be 2019 in my mind because I don't have election, but it was a major occasion when she was given an award by the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who described, there was another woman peacekeeper who was given the same prize. And he described that through their work, Suman Gavani, Indian, has brought new perspectives and have helped to build trust and confidence among the communities we serve. See, one of the major problems which United Nations peacekeeping forces faced was the challenge of sexual exploitation or sexual abuse also. Many UN peacekeeping forces were later on reprimanded and blamed for sexual misconduct. But fortunately, the Indian peacekeeping forces were never ever sort of blamed for such conduct. And I think this is something that needs to be kept in mind, that at times we decry ourselves. But internationally, I think the Indian peacekeeping forces stand out because of their stout commitment to a gender sensitivity. But by and large, if you see that peacekeeping is actually a very little part of this peace building. It's an endless debate, my friends, my young colleagues, students. But let me say that peace building is not simply stopping a war between countries. Peace building is also about stopping what we called structural violence, cultural violence, the language that we use. And I think there, the women can play a role not only in international life, but I would think in also in municipal life, in local life, and and that is the reason. You see, we every year we have this International Women's Day celebration, but most of the times, if you see the theme of this celebration relates to the same question: peace and development. Uh, Peace and development will come back as one of the primary agenda of women's participation across the world. Some examples I can read out for you. Like, for instance, in 1997, the theme of International Women's Day was Women and Peace Table. Women and Peace Table. In 1998, it was Women and Human Rights. In 1999, World Free of Violence Against Women. In the year 2000, the theme was Women Uniting for Peace. In 2001, Women in Peace, Women Managing Conflict. This was 2001. The title, Women in Peace, semicolon, Women Managing Conflicts. And in 2013, a promise is a promise. This was the theme. A promise is a promise, time for action to end violence against women. So this is every year. Now 2015, the SDGs were launched, Sustainable Development Goals were launched. And if you see that the Secretary General had given a lot of UN Secretary General in talking about, he had given a lot of importance to the question of women participation or women actually, and he lamented. In fact, there's very good data which suggests that if the number of women in peace processes can be raised to 30%, just 30%, the impact of peacefulness could go up as high as 70%. Such a strong role is given to the role of women in peace process. But there are difficulties also, in the sense that it's an endless analysis. But you see, we can learn from examples, like, for instance, in case of Nepal, where suddenly the Maoists really glorified women fighters, women Maoist fighters, women guerrillas. I think the same thing is done by the Naxalites here. They glorify these women as their heroes. But what happened once the peace process was started in Nepal, these important commanders and the captains and the leaders of women, they were just dropped dead. I think no role was given to them in the peace process. Peace process was once again occupied. Peace table, if I can say, was once again occupied by the men, not by the women. So the point I'm trying to build up here is this, that somehow the role of women as peacemakers, the role of women in international decision maker has been quite an instrumental kind of trajectory. And it can't be otherwise, because even now the world is driven by a patriarchal, a masculine approach to deal with the situation around. We sometimes, time to time, we show our sort of sensitivity towards women, um, and flag it out. I think the most remarkable was, as I mentioned earlier, uh, the process had started, as I said, uh, in early 21st century itself. In During, I think, in 2010, around 2011, there was this Rome Statute of International Criminal Court, which recognized various acts of sexual violence during conflict as war crimes. They said any sexual violence that is engaged during the conflict should be treated severely as war crimes. And these include rape, sexual slavery, enforced prostitution, forced pregnancy, enforced sterilization, and other forms of grave sexual violence, and persecution on account of gender violence. Now, this was a theme that has resonated, and which led to, basically, this is the backgrounder. In 2000, United Nations Security Council passed this 1325, which basically means women, peace, and security. So the argument is this is known as WPS resolutions. Uh, so it was a series of resolution which talked about the role of increasing role of women, or increasing imperative of women sort of contributing to the process of conflict resolution. Now, so the life goes on, and the struggle of women also goes on. There is enormous literature. What we know is that Women, Peace and Security Agenda, known as WPS, Women, Peace and Security Agenda, has led to substantive increase in the number of peace agreements that include specific provisions concerning the inclusion of women agenda, and new organizations were floated. There is now a UN Women. It's an entity, United Nations entity, which argued that since the adoption of this resolution 1325, nearly 20% of peace agreements have included references of women, compared with only 11% between 1990 and 2000. So 2000 was the watershed when this 1325 was passed. We need to know, more about it. But I think, living in India, we also need to focus on our own examples. I mentioned about the Mothers Association, Naga Mother Association, Ama Samuhas, and similarly in Nepal also we had Didi Behni. Didi Behni is Indian, Didi Behni. So these associations were meant to transcend the victimhood discourse of women, to explore women's agency in peace process. I repeat, so a lot of such initiatives have taken place in the past, which wanted to not simply show women as the victims, but also explore women's agency in peace process. So this is one of those transformative movement. But as we know, and these are the last words, that there is a long way to go. I think a recent UNIFEM studies, this once again United Nations agency, which indicated that women's participation in peace negotiations continues to be very low in recent years, notwithstanding 1325 of 2000. And the WPS agenda also remains unimplemented in many conflict zones. In 2015, a global study on the implementation of this UN Resolution 1325 reveals that the progress of WPS agenda at the local level has shrunk from what it used to be earlier. Just, I think, 3 years ago, there was this UN report on women, peace, and security, which was outlined by the UN Secretary General, claimed that despite the global visibility that WPS has provided to women's experiences of conflict, the implementation of the WPS agenda, WPS is Women, Peace, Security Agenda, that women can offer a very effective agency for peace building. So the implementation of this WPS agenda at the country level continues to fall short. So, these are this is a work in progress, as we say, but there is no denying that the feminist perspectives have given new thinking about war and war crimes, rape, sexual violence, and it has challenged the traditional understanding of politics as simply masculine struggle for power, and also created a space for women voices to be heard. So there is and now no wonder you have so many illustrious women in international relations. I mean, endless is the list, ranging from Sirumai Bandaranaike to Mrs. Indira Gandhi to Aung San Suu Kyi to Benazir Bhutto to Malala to Mother Teresa. And these are wonderful people who have created a space, a niche for themselves. But as I said, this is a work in progress. And I just wanted my young friends to, many of you might have found what I have just discussed as very preliminary. Yes, it was supposed to be preliminary in the sense, the idea is to say that the women's studies, the feminist perspectives, they are not simply about women themselves. They are about the macro reality. They are about democracy. They are about human rights. They are about environment. They are about war and peace. They are about peace buildings. And more so, I think the feminist commitments is not just for the gender injustice, but probably in every possible way to remove structural inequality in the social and international order. And this is with these words, I can see this time is 3:30. My time is up. I don't know how the organizers have planned to organize, if there are any questions, I'll be very happy to answer. Thank you. Thank you very much. Pranam.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Your lecture was very informative, sir. Very excellent lecture. Lots of participants are writing this. And sir, we are just looking for questions. If any questions they are asking, I'll ask. Nidhi, have you seen any question? Nidhi? Any participants wants to ask anything, any question, please write on the chat box, in the chat box. If anyone wants to ask anything from sir, please write your questions in the chat box. Sir, they are writing a highly enlightening speech, informative session, very nice informative session. And really, sir, it was very informative, sir, for me also.
You are always welcome. I think it's a
sir,
new.
some Divya is asking some questions. Sir, how would you address the cases of refugee, the migrant women? refugee migrant women.
Yeah,
Sorry.
as we people who do peace studies would know that refugee women and migrant women, or as such, the problem of refugee and migration is a very intrinsic, component to the to this understanding of peace studies, discourse, whatever you call it. Now, there are very interesting studies which have described or which have analyzed the problem of migrant women. This, as you know, that this kind of migration can take place within a country itself, or also it could be across borders, like in case of Bangladesh, or in case of, if we are not talking about India as a whole, I think it's happening past a decade or more in Europe because of the Syrian conflict. Women migrants are going there. So they are very interesting studies, and it as I said, that because of the distinctive gender roles of women, that the migration of women actually has different kind of connotation and different kind of violence also embedded in the process. I mean, there are very terrible stories about how this forced migration or internal migration used to take place across borders, and how the border police have often been very exploitative of the vulnerability of these women. So I don't have any exactly, I mean, I think this is a very core problem, and that the world is facing. Migration itself, if it is peaceful, if it is economic condition oriented, it is a welcome thing. But then generally, forced migration or refugee issues, although these two issues are not similar, it's taken as one of those unresolved issues of international relations today. I mean, for refugee issues, for instance, we have NHRC. I'm sorry, there are agencies, United Nations agencies, which UNHCR, which deals with it, but there is nothing for the migration or migrant women. But a lot of scholars, I mean, there are groups in Calcutta, for example, Calcutta Research, CRG. If you can type it out on your internet, see, they have a lot of wonderful work. They have done studies on migrant women, and their PhDs. I mean, we all in our Banaras Hindu universities, also some of our research students in the Peace Center that we have, they are working on the plight of migrant. What are the special difficulties which migrant women face? So it's very interesting to realize that you are able to relate migration or migrant women as a part of this particular discourse. Thank you.
Sir, Moshmi Das is asking how religion affects violence against women.
You know what? Currently, I'm working on just a contrary theme of how religion actually can promote, and should promote. And in fact, in many parts of the world, how this interreligious dialogue or religion may promote peacefulness rather than violence. But generally speaking, religion is mostly very instrumentally used to perpetuate violence. And when it comes to women in particular, its role become all the more horrendous, in the sense that we see that the question of conversion, sometimes the question of interreligious connections, haven't we seen, not only in India, but across the world, it very difficult moments for the lawmakers and also for the people who have any social consciousness, and that how do we stop atrocities around religious conviction issues when it comes to the question of women. I mean, these are all very interesting areas in which people can study and can do a lot of practical work. But different parts of the world, different case studies, case histories, if you see, we have a lot of learnings from how religion can negatively play a role. But as I said, it can be, and the same thing about the women, not simply studying women as victims, but also transcending that and learning women as the agency of peace building. So similarly, I mean, I think that can be turned around, but it's a pathetic situation world over. I mean, and especially in our part of the world, where we see that women are they are at the receiving end of this religious bigotry, if I can say, and violence from within a religious disposition, dispension, or even across religious dispensions. Thank you. Okay, are you there? I lost you. Hello.
Yes, sir. Hello, sir. Thank
Yeah.
you so much, sir.
All right.
Libomsha is asking, thank you, sir. Your lecture is excellent. And one question he's asking, how can women take part in conflict resolution process effectively when there is less number of women participations in international politics?
The answer is very simple. You start engaging in conflict resolution place in your own community, in your own neighborhood. You just open 2 hours time, put it out on your outside wherever you live, a board, Jhagda Suljhao, and you will see that women will attract much greater participation, because people believe that women are perhaps more sincere, more non-partisan. You can do it at your neighborhood level. And once maybe you form an NGO, you will find so much of happiness that you will not think about international situation. Internationally, I think United Nations has been warning, giving data that 27% increase in the number of women in peace process will add to 70% of more positive outcomes. This is the data of last year. But actually, it's not happening. And so we have to create more sensitivity, more pressure, more awareness. And as I said, that end of the day, we have to prove Hobbes and Morgenthau and Kautilya all wrong when they say that politics is all about struggle for power. It is not. It is about sensitivity, which women understand better than. All right.
Thank you, sir. Another question I'm taking, sir.
Okay,
This is the last question, I think.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your presentation. Shubha Patnaik is asking, sir, do the present pandemic have any effect on the role of women in international peacemaking?
You see, pandemic has affected everybody. But in particular, I think if you see women individually and also as an organization, if you see the website of UN Women, you will find that they are engaged in a lot of work, which is very distinctive, which is very distinct. I mean, if you look at the WHO, it is led by women. A lot of these UN agencies are doing it. In fact, it's very comforting to see that in most of the scientific reports about the labs in Western countries and as well as in our country, we find that and the women are playing a role. I mean, we in our own university, we really admire one women professor who just opened her life for just to examine the to engage in RT-PCR test from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock in the night for no incentive. That was not her job. So, but she felt that it is very important to provide some comfort. She did it. And a lot of these, the paramedical workers, a lot of sisters, a lot of wonderful people, majority of them are women. So individually, as well as in terms of organization, see, the argument is very simple. There is a felt feeling that women have greater capacity of providing a solution with greater sensitivity. And I think that is where every answer is poised. So in terms of pandemic responses also, if you see, you will find women responses have been far more earnest, sincere, no comparisons, but that's true. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. And Now I request Nidhi Mathur. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, sir. Thank you very much, sir. And now I request Nidhi Mathur, please give vote of thanks, formal vote of thanks. Nidhi.
Thank you so much, sir, for your lecture. And as we can see in the chat box, there are so many participants who have been posting congratulatory and appreciation messages for you, sir. So on behalf of Teaching Learning Center, we thank you for sparing your valuable time and addressing this lecture. We thank you so much, sir.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Now, some questions. I think, Nidhi, we have to take some other questions related with the MOOCs portal and
Madhu,
feedback from.
Madhu, we have our another. Hello, Madhu.
Yeah.
Madhu, we have our other speaker with us. Anju ma'am is there.
So, Madhu ma'am,
without
we can
wasting a
start
single-
with the Anju ma'am's lecture, and probably later on we'll take the MOOCs question.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Okay, then. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye. You can ask questions to the next speakers. I think she'll answer them better.
Sir,
Okay,
we can.
bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Okay, so hello everybody, and welcome to part 2 of the day 1 series of the 2-week refresher course on feminist teaching and research in higher education, theory and practice. So today we have another speaker who will be enlightening you with the theme of a role of women in society and politics, and it is none other than Professor Anju Sharan Upadhyay. But before I request ma'am to take over, I would like to introduce her with the participants first. So Professor Anju Sharan Upadhyay has served Banaras Hindu University for over 4 decades. Ma'am has published various papers in international and national journals and books related to women and gender issues. She has been associated with various projects related to women, peace, governance, and society. Professor Upadhyay has also presented papers in many international and national conferences, seminars, and symposia. She also has many honorable administrative posts, and she's also member of many administrative bodies. Along with that, Professor Upadhyay has received many prestigious fellowships, grants, and awards, such as the Fulbright Nehru Lecturing Award, Australian Indian Council Award, Guest Scholar Award at the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholar, Washington, D.C., UGC Career Award. Ma'am has also served on various high-level committees of Ministry of Human Resource and Development, Ministry of External Affairs, University Grants Commission, Union Public Service Commission UPSC, international and national NGOs, and the list goes endless. We welcome you, ma'am. I now request you, ma'am, to deliver your session. Over to you, Professor Upadhyay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So first of all, a very sincere gratitude to all of you for inviting me to share my ideas on this refresher course. I've always looked upon these refresher courses as opportunities of sharing our understanding and exchanging knowledge, so to speak, rather than having a lecture or a talk, although you do label us as resource people, and that's a big, huge mantle on our shoulders. But yes, let me try and kind of focus your attention to something that has, to my mind, not been studied from an angle where it probably should have been. As I understand, perhaps this refresher course is about feminist methodologies and feminist approaches and feminist frameworks. To my mind, and perhaps to those on whose shoulders we stand today, has also not been exclusive. It's been one one umbrella from where we have inputs from almost all the branches of human knowledge, ranging from so-called hard sciences, that is ranging from languages like mathematics to humanities to arts to social sciences, and even within social sciences, Although for long years, feminism or feminist studies or women's studies was generally dealt with the sociology department, basically, because I recall as a young assistant professor, we used to call ourselves lecturers then. We would always, kind of smirk on these scholars who would be doing women's studies. And it took us a long time to understand that our social sciences, be it politics or history or economics, is so very one-legged if we do not add or introduce or induct the feminist angle to our understanding. And that actually grew along with the growth of women's studies, if I may. 1970s, early 70s was the period that this report from the government of India was brought out and presented before the United Nations, along with similar other reports that came from other parts of the world to the United Nations organization as a process of the Committee on the Status of Women established by the UN in the 40s, known as this. The name of this report was Towards Equality. But when we turned the pages of this report, we found that it was anything but equality. Women were actually absolutely ignored and doled out unequal treatment. And that came as a very big shock to us, because we were used to reading all those protest movements in the freedom struggle that women staged. Personally, I, for instance, knew that women, my mother's generation, would go for Prabhat Peris in the morning, which many a times was, kind of put down by lathis. Why? Because it was a violation of some order or the other. I could recall my grandmother, despite being a wife of a judge, doing the charkha as instructed by Gandhiji. So it was a shock to us that what happened to these women? Why is it that they are so unequal in terms of their contribution in economy, in terms of their ownership of property, in terms of their participation in politics? And there gradually came the answer, because we have perhaps not given them the kind of space that was required. We have perhaps, allowed them to stay back at home and respect the decision of the so-called male stream to go back to your homes and look after children, because that's where your primary responsibility comes from. So coming from that perspective, the mushrooming of the women's studies centers directed by the University Grants Commission in the mid-1980s, one was increasingly made aware about the women's issues. And that is where the contemporary story begins. But this afternoon, or this rather evening, it's almost 4 o'clock tea time for some of you. I would like you to go with me, not decades, but centuries back, when women were very much visible to in terms of their involvement in political processes, in terms of their asking for what was due to them, in terms of not crying, not appealing, but protesting that justice has not been done to them. So the topic where I would be focusing is labeled as Women, Activism and Politics. And actually, this is precisely the working title with which we are working with the Routledge to bring out a book which is due in either late fall or early winters this year. So the reason I'm focusing on activism and politics is that I'm trying to bring forth something which so many of our scholars, be they political scientists or environmentalists or economists, have ignored. And this takes me again back to an event which was organized by UniFem. Then UN Women used to be addressed as UniFem. And their meeting was taking place in Lucknow. And one of the then secretaries, actually one secretary for women and empowerment, he turns up in the session that I was attending to say that women in India have been very lucky as compared to their Western counterparts. Why? Because they got equal rights on a silver plate through the Constitution. They got equal rights to vote. They got, assurances of not being treated discriminately, and he went on and on and on. And that was way too much, because I thought that people at that level would be perhaps better educated, but obviously they were not. They were oblivious of the fact that how women at every step had participated, either through peaceful means or through not so peaceful means, in securing their entitlements. So though we in India do not have pictures where similar to the, say, for instance, American women standing in front of the Capitol Hill asking for right to vote in 1910. But how can we forget that women in our country protested along with their male counterparts to bring forth something which was, which was so very precious to them. And therefore, it becomes almost our responsibility to delineate as to how much did women have to struggle, and how much have they received, and what all still needs to be done. So I'll very quickly, kind of underscore a couple of things. Which goes without saying, but since these are the early lectures of this course, I think this is the time that we need to highlight that, women are not a cohesive group. To think that every woman is equal or every woman is empowered, or they are, women as such is like, a one single force or agency. It's very unfair. All of us are aware that there are not only differences in classes, in caste groups, in religion, but there are so many deviances here. There are women who are far better privileged, and as I speak, I think all of us who are sitting here would agree that we are way too fortunate and way too privileged as compared to those sisters of ours who are toiling away either in the brick kilns or bringing water from kilometers to their homes, or if nothing else, to simply, supporting in the running of the households. So yes, there's a big diversity there. And therefore we say that we need to, kind of flag this issue at the beginning, that we're not talking about every woman. There are women who have also, encouraged or kind of condoned discriminatory treatment, being treated out to their domestic women. A question that used to be such a common popular question during the 1990s, that you people talk about women's movements and women's rights, but the biggest agent that is suppressive of women's rights is the woman at home, the mother-in-law syndrome. And they forgot that was nothing but a perpetuation of the victimhood, that, something which they had learned through their socialization or growing up. So the perpetrators becoming, so the victims becoming perpetrators. And this has been like a constant, struggle. So during the freedom struggle also, those women who participated in securing rights for them also were subjected to another colonial exploitation. In the public sphere, yes, they were discriminated against in terms of men, and domestically they were also subjected to a lot of criticism. But when we go even further, we find that there are segments, there are classes, say for instance of colonial or of indigenous women, who have suffered even triple discrimination, and therefore their struggles have been still more difficult. And here we find that, the issues that have affected women have been very, very diverse. Ethnicity being one, that, well, this is something which is a part of our cultural existence, and in the garb of multicultural existence or multiculturalism, this kind of a subjugation continued. Then there has been religion, which has come up in a big way. Actually, I joined somewhere I thought that this talk will start at 3:30, so I joined the discussion at 3:30 itself. And there I could hear, some of the participants questioning, what about religion? Yes, religion was a major force which tried to suppress women. On the one hand, the Hindu religion had deified girls and women. On the other hand, it was this religion that said that unless and until a woman kind of makes herself subservient to her husband, who was looked upon through the various rituals as a manifestation or as a representative of Vishnu, his feet will be washed, and in so many other regions of the country, there would be other symbols through which the woman would be tutored to believe that he is the Lord. So on the one hand, there would be religion that would deify women. On the other, there would be the same religion that would be, excluding women on various occasions, ranging from the menstrual cycle. And of course, the narrative is way too old that women were subjected to violence way before they were born. Be it female feticide or infanticide or bride burning or sati or, giving unequal treatment to them. But here again, if we look at the closer picture, we find that there are so many segments within the world, within our country, for instance, the indigenous women who are again triply discriminated against. Say, for instance, the indigenous women, their literacy rates are below 50%, which is not just below the literacy rates of women other than the indigenous people. Their infant mortality rates are twice as those of other Indians, and the displacement from their lands is also huge. They have been living in resource-rich areas, and they have very often been, affected by conflicts. For instance, if we look at the Jharkhand situation, we find that the bauxite, coal, copper, iron ore, limestone, tin, the area is so very rich that it has become, and then the dams that were created, that were made, had destabilized them, and their only way of resenting this would be through protesting against these mines, like Jadugura mines and so on and so forth. But even then, they have been written out of history. They have not been recorded as people who have, played peaceful, active, vital roles in protests and conflicts. And therefore, it is very, very important that we look at this narrative from a perspective to figure out, to then see that the amount of changes that came about, people were behind them. So I'll take you to a very elementary thing, we're in. Some of our, some of the agents in this entire narrative were the people who, fought against the colonial existence, and they fought also against various odds in the society. And the method through which they did was varied. The names of people like Tarabai Shinde and her writings, Istri Purush Tulna, flash before our minds, and questions that narrative, which is a routine thing to say, that, well, in India, the feminist movement was not against men. On the contrary, men were fighting for the causes of women. And the examples that are given are those of Ram Mohan Roy and Jyotiba Phule and people of their genre, accepted that men did come forward to fight for the cause of women. But then there were definitely an acute awareness that men remained to be very, very acutely conscious about their privileged positions, and women were not given the proper place, the exact status as was due to them. So there was a constant demand for equality that empowered these movements in the country from time to time. The women activists in India have stood for the right kind of changes for decades. And despite this patriarchal dominance, which is used to disrupt women's sanctity, and it challenges and ridicules democratic structure of the country. So activism in India has, amongst women, of course, we're talking about women, is very rich. And at the same time, it's very, very complex. And it is not just restricted to ground educations, as in many ways it has become institutionalized with academia, but it is also involving women from time to time. So these women are the ones who have transformed the social, the political, the legal, the cultural, sorry about this, and the economical structure. And the economical structure. And the long history of women's activism in India represents their ability to stand against injustices. And women have led mass movements, they've reshaped the relevant discourses, they've challenged the law and mobilized the mobs. So women's civic participation in the country has been remarkable and is not just motivated by the issues of gender discrimination. They're not only concerned and limited with gender discrimination, but they have expanded themselves to issues pertaining to caste, to ideology, to religion, and have stimulated women activists from time to time. And despite the long-standing and active women's movements, patriarchy still, continues, and that is something which needs, and there is a commitment for amongst women to question that patriarchy as well. So I'm not going into history and talking about All India Women's Association and so on and so forth, but from 60s and 70s, when the significance of gender equality necessitated the involvement of women, as gender equality brings to peace building new degrees of democratic inclusiveness, faster and more durable economic growth, and human and social capital recovery. So this is something which is extremely important to identify. That we are very fond of saying that women have that India banished or rather made sati illegal way back in 1933 or 1931, and the basic initiative that was taken by people like Raja Ram Mohan Roy. But it is very public knowledge that as late as 1987, and actually even till very, very recently, there would be an occasional attempt to do Saraswati, to commit the act of sati. How voluntary it is, how involuntary it is for everybody to know. And there we find that each and every such episode is met with a lot of resistance and with a very serious effort to bring about legislative change, to bring about political change. And I'm mentioning the Roop Cover episode, when an 18-year-old committed the act of sati way back in 1987, and women from, educated women from, if any one of you are from Rajasthan, you would know this college in Jaipur. Women teachers of this college came along, and women from the university as well came along to condemn it and to bring about an injunction against allowing that place to become a site of reverence. So there's been there have been a lot many similar, initiatives. What I'm trying to bring forth here is that, be it the Dowry Prohibition Act of 1961 or the Hindu Marriage Act of 1955 or the Hindu Succession Act of 65, almost each initiative had met with protest. For instance, the Hindu Act, the Hindu Code Bill, when the committee, which was assigned the task of bringing about a change in the Hindu Civil Code, was taking a round of the entire country, it was met with protests from the people who were apparently very well educated and very well informed. And they were the ones who questioned that you're bringing women at par with men, you're trying to give them right to inheritance, and probably what you are doing in this process is that you're ruffling the feathers of the very stable and harmonious Hindu society. And some of these acts, which later on also were very difficult to get incorporated, were acts like, Child Marriage Restraint Amendment Act, Equal Remuneration Act, Immoral Trafficking Act. And these were all being enacted in 70s and 80s. Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques Act. I'm sure you all are aware about the female feticide. Feticides, fetuses being killed, and how it was almost like a done thing in some of the provinces, and unfortunately and ironically, those states that were better off in terms of economic indicators, in terms of literacy rates, states like Punjab and Haryana had lesser female, had lesser FMR rates, female-male ratio rates as compared to the rest of the country. And they had gone so low as to be 886 to 1,000, which was very, very kind of worrying. And then there was, letters that were written and, petitions that were signed by women to ensure that this female feticide is declared as illegal. Some of the states declared it as illegal, but it took the center quite some time. I think it was 1994 or 93 or 94 that the Prenatal Diagnostic Technique Regulation and Prevention Misuse Act was enacted. And it was not even till then that it was implemented. I recall in the Women's Studies Center that Banaras Hindu University runs, some of the younger researchers pretended to visit these diagnostic clinics to check out if that act was actually being implemented. They pretended that they were pregnant, and they said they wanted to know the gender of the unborn child. And the diagnostic centers of Banaras simply said there'll be some extra cost to detect the sex of the unborn child, and they will do it. So this is how at the grassroots level, it was a commitment to bring women at par with men, so that at least they see the light of the day, so that at least they are born. Similarly, I recall from small things to big things. I recall that when I took my elder son to a bank, when the baby arrives and they get small money, and the country in the 80s and even till the early 90s was not that flourishing in its economy, that small money would be kept aside. So I turned up in a bank and I asked the bank manager to open an account in the name of my child. And he said that who would be the guardian of the child? And I said, well, I will be the guardian of the child. I'm the mother of the child. And the banker, the bank manager looked at me and he said, where is the father? And I said, the father is around. But then why do you ask where's the father? And then he came up with this, rule to me, saying that he said, what is the status of the father? So I said, what has the status of the father got to do with the opening of a bank account of a child? And he said, well, actually, by status, I don't mean whether he's a doctor or a lawyer or a mechanic. What I want to ask you, and that are you, is the father, are you with your husband? Is the father around? And I said, yes. And he told me that, well, the law says that the natural guardian of a child is the father. So from there, we started writing letters of petition to the government, and those were the pre-internet days. So to write a letter or to write a petition used to call a lot of effort and a lot of initiative. And then finally, we got this order that yes, it could be either the mother or the father of the child to who could be the natural guardian. So in small things and big, in routine things and not so routine things, there have been struggles that each one of us had to make. Just before I came up, Professor Upadhyay probably was talking about the women and the peace processes. And I'm sure he must have come across Resolution 1325, which was enacted by the United Nations Organization and the Security Council, actually. And probably not many of you would know that the initiative to bring about to include women in the peace processes came through petitions from women who were sitting from every corner of the world. This was the time that internet had just come up in a very rudimentary way. Our university had started working on what was then known as ERNet, and we would have only small data allowance to negotiate. And we communicated through that data. I was occasionally working for International Alert as well then. We communicated and started writing petitions, and we signed 1 million petitions that the Security Council should bring about a resolution to say that every peace process should include women in that as well. So be it prenatal diagnostic techniques or the Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act, almost everything was made as an effort to bring about sorry, just a minute. Sorry about this. So, and then in this process, we found occasions like, women being subjected to sexual violence. And in this context, the Mathura case came up in a big way. In the 1970s, there was this minor girl by the name of Mathura who was who was raped in custody, and the judge, the district court, the district level, judge declared her the assailants to be guilty. The High Court reversed it, and the Supreme Court confirmed that yes, how can she be raped because there was no resentment of this act on her body, and there came an open letter written by 4 women academics saying that a minor or a major girl cannot resist any such effort or attempt while she's in custody against people who are armed. And from there, the Evidence Act was changed. And in this area, there has been a constant progress in terms of bringing about the changes that it brought. So for instance, even the Bhavri Devi case, 20 years after Mathura happened, Bhavri Devi was assaulted by men. Bhavri Devi, who was supposed to be of inferior caste, was assaulted sexually by upper caste men because she was resisting. She was telling them, she was performing her duty to tell them not to marry a baby or not to marry a minor girl. And they thought Bhavri was interfering with their traditions, and so they wanted to teach her a lesson. And here again, a similar thing happened, that yes, men of higher caste would not go and collectively rape a lower caste woman. And there was a lot of change that had happened in between. So a change in a sense that it was almost going to and fro and to and fro. And to an extent that this also became like a national, or rather an international event, when Bhavri Devi attended the 1995 conference, the Beijing conference, and where she represented something which was not supposed to be brushed under the carpet. And then gradually we find that, be it the right to inheritance, that kept on gradually improving. The likes of, say, for instance, Beena Agarwal, who ensured that women should also get inheritance in the form of in agrarian land as well. The logic in the villages has all through been that the agrarian property should not go to the women. Why? Because the women marry outside the family, and this is patrilineal as well as patriarchal. And the chunk of land, if she inherits, will go to the other family. And therefore, property needs to be kept and protected and secured only within the family. And this was amended as recently as 2005. And there are folk songs where women would sing, they would work as labor on the lands of their own father. And these would be very heart-rendering songs saying that these were the lands on which I would sit on the shoulder of my father while he would be doing the tilling of the land. And today I'm working here for daily wage. Why? Because I've got married. I'm not entitled to this piece of property. And she was married off to somebody who did not have any land, and therefore she was reduced to simply agrarian labor. So all this definitely got impetus and support from the global players. I don't deny anything if we feel that today we are the ones who are simply biggest environmentalists. We are fooling ourselves, because there's a whole global commitment to protecting environment. Similarly, if we think that India has really taken big strides in isolation of the world, I think we are not representing the total truth. So, for instance, in the 1990s, the National Commission on Women were established. And so were other commissions like Human Rights Commission and like other commissions. And the establishment of this commission, at least it did nothing, it kind of showcased the commitment that the state had towards protecting the rights of women. And although it has remained very limited to interventions, and its membership is also mainly decided by the political considerations, it has not always in keeping with professional capability, and it has had a limited role. But still, there is at least one post where you could call up if you needed support. Another major step in this effect, in this unfolding, has been that of the reservation for seats, or the quota system under which women received their quota, and reservation for women in local self-government, what is famously known as the 73rd and the 74th Amendment. But along with it, there were several schemes that were launched to uplift the position of women in the 1990s. And here again, all these schemes, unlike what we think were that they were simply, given away as gifts, were not that easily done. Either it was through the international pressure to, which was then known as the agenda of good governance, that unless you have transparency, unless you have accountability, unless you have human rights, you're not fit enough to be included in the Bretton Woods governance system. So this was, be it the establishment of Mahila Samriddhi Yojana or Rashtriya Mahila Kosh or Indira Mahila Yojana, all these came up during the 1990s, or the Dwakra and Balika Samriddhi. All these programs were ones that were integrated projects for the development of women through self-help groups as well. And these self-help groups, again, they provided counseling for women in distress and made provisions for food and clothing. But it was not that they were given on a plate for women to be gulped up. It was all the time the responsibility was that of the woman. If she was taking a loan as small as 5,000 rupees, it was she who was expected to return that money and return that money in time. Otherwise, her other members of the self-help group would have to fill it up. So it's a sham to believe that, yes, the government was giving something. It was that, the frameworks were there, the apparatus was in place, but this was being run and, enacted, and this was essentially on the shoulders of those women who might not be very well educated or very well conversant with the modern phrases. And in so many studies now, it is getting revealed that maybe women have not benefited from them as much as they could have, but at least we can say with, a lot of certainty that women have been at the forefront to take responsibility, to be alert, to be involved. And the term welfare has almost become almost become hackneyed. Nobody wants to say that this is a welfare scheme. It is always an empowerment of women is king. And therefore, to achieve gender equality or gender justice or holistic development of women, the mission plans to facilitate only the economic empowerment or the entrepreneurship or skill development. And for this, I think the main credit needs to go to these women who have come up to this expectation. So much about the positive aspects, but then there is a lot of lacuna that continues to be there. I'm on purpose not talking about, say, for instance, the protest movements against, against the violence that took place in Delhi in the end of 2012, the Nirbhaya case, which some of us would, some of you at least, I don't know your ages, but it's just a 10-year-old episode that you probably would recall if you were in school also, how young women and men came up to the streets and protested so comprehensively against that a committee was set up, and this committee then recommended certain legislation, and that legislation is now in place. However, we find that so much still needs to be done. And the reason why so much is to be done is that A, the complexity, as I pointed out at the beginning, and B, it's almost like, 3 steps forward and 2 steps backwards. So, for instance, ranging from the time we were talking about Bhamri Devi and about the sexual exploitation case of this, assault, exploitation is a wrong expression for that, assault case of this woman. But I would simply say that out of that struggle and out of the support that the Vishaka NGO extended to Bhamri Devi came up something really strong. And what was that something which came up very strong? Women who were working in spaces which were assured to them by the Constitution. The Constitution assured each woman to be treated equally, to be given equal opportunity. And that remained a very, very empty expression up until a point that the Vishaka guidelines were declared by the Supreme Court and were later on incorporated. But when I speak to the lawyers who were involved in that, I realize that, and they make me realize that even these guidelines, which are, I'm sure you know it, the do's and don'ts in public places, and these guidelines were the guidelines that were extremely important for women to work in common places. Seemingly, supposedly, those very small things like, have been called names or being, essentialized and pulled down and infantilized and not taken seriously, right from there down to obnoxious looks which your male colleagues would give you, to sideway glances, to not being approving of the way you dress by commenting upon it. All that progressively, to as far as my observation goes, came to a very, very minimal. And I recall, not with a lot of pride, but with some sense of embarrassment, some 20 years ago, when I was the Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences at Banaras in the university, we had somebody who was coordinating the exams. And for those of you who would know about BHU, you would know, I know Meronissa has been a student here. It's a huge university. It's a residential university. The number of students appearing for these exams used to be enormous. And these students would then come up and they would have to, and all kinds of tactics used to be used then, ranging from, copying from books down to, bringing those chits and so on and so forth. So in the coordinator's room, one of the coordinator would often crack sexual jokes, which would be made very indirectly, and they would sound very innocent. And they were made in my presence. I really had to bring in the Vishaka case. This was 1998. I had to bring in the Vishaka case and tell this coordinator that he can be damaged if he repeated these things. So these are what I'm trying to bring to you this evening is, the big picture and the small picture. Like, as when you study in the textbooks, these are the narratives that you don't come across, that they don't come across to you. But this is how it impacts. But whether this impact is very comprehensive or not is for each one of you to discover through the journeys of your lives. When you kind of mature as professionals, this is for you to discover what all equipments do you have to ensure equality. So, there are so many other tools that are trying to bring about equality. And these tools are worth appreciating. I'll give another example. For instance, in the efforts to bring about gender equality, there is something which my province government has introduced, and they are known as Meena classes. Now, Meena is a fictitious girl, and she talks through the pages of the textbooks of these children who go to government schools, how her rights are equal to that of her brother or the other male members of the family. And so the girl who goes to study there gets conscious about her rights, which is a great thing to happen. But the boys just do not pay any heed to that, because when they come home, it is the girl child who is expected to provide them the food and ensure the cleanliness of the house, and at times even clean the boys' clothes. I mean, her brothers, of course, or her cousins. And this has a total approval by the elders of the family. And when you spend time with these families, it's then that it dawns upon you that there is no need to remain complacent about the women's equality in our country, or about women's equal participation in the productive forces of our country, or about equal participation of women in the political processes. And fine, we take pride in the fact that we have had a president and a prime minister and chief ministers who have been women. We've had luminaries like, Sarojini Naidu and Padmaja Naidu and Vijayalakshmi Pandits and Sucheta Kriplanis. But we have also had our Bhavani Devis. We've also had our Mathuras. And these are the women who can only gain, justice through the participation of women in public spaces, in the commons. I mean, so much so that a simple glance in the public spaces of our country, you would not find as many women as you would find men, because the freedom to go out for women is so constrained that the minute you watch a female figure in the public spaces, you feel that there's something wrong with it in certain pockets. I'm talking about smaller cities of the country, be it late evening, and even in cities like Benares, you would not come across many girls who would be out in the public. We get to even notice that not ourselves. We get to notice when foreign students come to study here in Benares, and they respond that, is it not all men who are here, not very many women who are out? And this is a place that boasts of having an Institute of Technology, an Institute of Medical Sciences, an Institute of Agricultural Sciences, where women, by the way, are numbering more than men. But there is a very strong, bias against accepting women in spheres that are routinely normal for them to appear. So, we've had our Mayavatis, and we've had our Sushma Swarajas and our Binda Karats and Meera Kumars. But still, the percentage of women in Indian Parliament is not that robust as it is, as it should have been. And yes, of course, the percentage of women, cabinet members and women ministers is still very low. I mean, India, that boasts of being the largest democracy in the world, not the oldest, but the largest for sure, ranks almost 149th as per the report of the Interparliamentary Union of 2019, just a year and a half ago, that amongst the 193 countries, India is standing on the 149th rank, which I think is almost like a rank which a failure should also be embarrassed about. Similarly, our percentage of women in the legislative assemblies, it's very poor, 9%. According to Global Gender Gap Index, women make up only 14.4% of the parliament. So on the one hand, you're seeing the struggle from Tarabai Shinde's Stri Purush Tulna down to our struggle against Nirbhaya. On the other hand, you see that notwithstanding all the profile that we get, all the medals that we grab, that yes, we've even had a Dalit chief minister, we've even had a prime minister who was as strong as a man. We haven't really made it. There is still miles to go. We have to cover a lot of ground to cover that. Women do not enjoy equal rights, and they do not participate in traditional decision making also. We conducted a research a couple of years ago, actually it was 4 years ago, in the so-called matriarchal society of India in Meghalaya. And we were shocked to discover that it was actually not matriarchal, it was only matrilineal. Why? Because the property of the family, yes, came to the woman, not to the man of the family, but this woman was empowered not to dispose it off without the consent of her brothers. So be it women from the northeastern region, or be it the women from the traditional, Daya Bhag or Mitakshara tradition, they have not been, as empowered as we would like them to believe. And yes, we have Mahila Shakti Abhiyans and we have Panchayat Mahila Shakti Abhiyans, but it's common knowledge that, the quota system or the reservation of women at the central level is wrought with a lot of distortions. So on the one hand, we see the women of all the diverse political parties joining hands and feeling very happy about making the quotas. But on the other hand, we find that women probably are never going to secure that. And that is something which is extremely, extremely, difficult to process for people who would expect us to be equal. So still, for instance, MMR here in our country is 145th. India stands at 145th out of 211 countries. And still, teenage marriages are extremely common. I mean, marrying somebody off at the age of 18 and making her a mother before she turned 19 is something which is violence against women. And, the number of child brides is also very, very horrendous. 1 out of every 3 child bride lives in India. And this is something which is, I'm not sounding radical, very radical. I was thinking that feminism is something which is not a very acceptable term for even feminists like Madhu Kishwar. She was, she's very fond of bringing out statements which are very iconoclastic. But I still recall her article where she said, I'm not a feminist. So a feminist in our country was looked upon as somebody who would be quarreling with men, who would be asking the liberation from, the bra burning and the lipstick smashing women. But one would definitely expect that women are given through not only through law, but through society as well, and a status, a respectability, which is due to them as a human being. So these protest groups in India that have brought this about, some of you might have come across their profiles as well. For instance, you would be knowing, or perhaps you'd be familiar with names like Indira Jaisingh. You probably would also be aware about the Shahbanu case, the Uniform Civil Code, and 1985. We've talked about the Deorara Sati incident of 87 and the Sati Prevention Act of 87. Many, many women had come together to demand for the law to abolish the practice of sati. And, as Flavia Agnes has very famously stated once, that if we were to go by the legislation of any country, India would rank at the top in terms of ensuring equal role of women in all the social, economic, political sectors. But alas, this doesn't match the reality of the social sector. And this is something which is to be reckoned with. This is something which is to be focused. And it appears that unless and until for every injustice there is a protest, that injustice continues to kind of perpetuate itself. Just this morning, I was reading the counter affidavit that the Delhi police has brought out in 20,000 pages, perhaps, against the 3 protesters to frame them as people who committed crimes in protesting against something which they very sincerely felt was not up to the constitution. It's a pity that the state apparatus also, which is representative of all its citizens, men as well as women, is also not doling out the equality to them. So be it I'm not simply saying, when we talk about the common civil code, so many of you would think that, yes, the civil code in the other communities is also not very fair to women. Yes, it is not fair at all. And it needs to be attended. The irony, however, is that the cry for a uniform civil code gets entangled in the political polemics of the country. And that is something which needs to be questioned. So the location of these agencies is something which needs to be focused and which needs to be flagged ever so often. And unless and until we flag these issues, the initiative of bringing a check to it or bringing about a protest against it to bring about changes would not be there. I'll stop here. I'm looking at the watch. It's 4:40 almost, and see if I need to address some questions before I kind of wrap it up. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am. Hello.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. And ma'am, lots of questions are asking from the participants side. Sir, ma'am, first question I'm taking from Dr. Bhagwati Verma. He or she, I don't know. She's writing, Namaskar, ma'am. आपकी दृष्टि में राजनीति क्या आम स्त्री के लिए ये आम रास्ता है? क्या राजनीति में जाना एक विमेन के लिए बहुत ही सिंपल है, आसान है, आम रास्ता है उसके लिए? ये पूछना चाह रहे हैं। और मैम, एक क्वेश्चन इन्हीं का है कि जनजातीय समाज में स्त्री की स्थिति किस रूप में है?
बहुत धन्यवाद भगवती जी। देखिए, राजनीति में जाना ना स्त्री के लिए आसान है। Does everybody understand Hindi here?
Yeah.
Everybody?
Ma'am, yeah. Ma'am, this is actually bilingual refresher course.
Okay, so, great. Very nice. That's the way it should be. तो मेरे ख्याल से राजनीति में जाना ना किसी स्त्री के लिए आसान है, ना ही किसी पुरुष के लिए आसान है, मगर स्त्री के लिए इसलिए थोड़ा ज्यादा कठिन है उन्हीं वजहों से जो मैंने अभी ऑलरेडी कही थी, कि बहुत सी चीजें ऐसी हैं जो कि महिलाओं की जो सोशलाइजेशन है, जो उनका पार्ट ऑफ अ कल्चर, उनका पार्ट ऑफ ग्रोइंग अप है, उसमें बहुत सी स्पेसेस महिलाओं को एक नेचुरल तरीके से प्रोहिबिट कर दी जाती है, और वो प्रोहिबिशन उनके सिस्टम का पार्ट बन जाता है। और उसमें एक बहुत महत्वपूर्ण और एक देखने में छोटी सी चीज लगती है, और वो क्या है कि आप अंधेरा होने के बाद आप घर के बाहर मत रहिए। तो वो एक तरह का पैरानोया समझते हैं, घबराहट देने वाली चीज, कि हमको कुछ हो जाएगा अगर हम अंधेरा होने के पहले घर वापस नहीं आएंगे। एक छोटी चीज है मगर एक महत्वपूर्ण चीज है। या जैसे हमारे जमाने में हुआ करता था, अरे भाई राजनीति में लड़कों के साथ घूमोगे तो कोई भले घर का लड़का शादी नहीं करेगा, एज इफ यू वंडरिंग अराउंड विद बॉयज और मेन, you're sleeping with them, or that you're a woman of loose morals. So ये जो कैरेक्टर असैसिनेशन वाली बात है, और ये सेक्सुअलिटी को इतनी प्रिविलेज देने की बात है, ये चीजें विमेन के लिए डबली डिसएम्पावरिंग हो जाती हैं. तो यूर राइट कि यस, विमेन के लिए पॉलिटिक्स में आना आसान, किसी के लिए भी पॉलिटिक्स में आना आसान नहीं है, मगर विमेन के लिए डबली आसान नहीं है. और इसके लिए हमको सोसाइटी के स्ट्रक्चर्स चेंज करने होंगे, और इसके लिए हमको हम सबकी दृष्टि चेंज करनी होगी. इज दैट ओके? दूसरा प्रश्न क्या था भगवती जी का, मुझे ध्यान नहीं.
भगवती जी का कि जनजातीय समाज में स्त्री की क्या स्थिति है वर्तमान में?
हाँ, जनजातीय समाज में वर्तमान में जो स्थिति महिला की है, वो जैसा हमने कहा ना, इट्स डबली एक्सप्लॉइट और ट्रिपली एक्सप्लॉइटेड सिचुएशन. कि जो जनजातियां हैं, देखिए जब भी कुछ उथल पुथल होती है तो जो सबसे ज्यादा अफेक्ट होती है वो कौन होता है? वो होम मेकर होता है. क्यों? अब जैसे हमने जादूगोड़ा माइंस की बात कही, तो अगर वहां खनन शुरू हुआ है तो लोगों को विस्थापित किया जाएगा. जब उनको विस्थापित किया जाएगा तो नेचुरली जो नेचुरल बैरियर्स ऑफ प्रोटेक्शन है उनके, जैसे उनकी फैमिली या जैसे उनकी कम्युनिटी, तो ये तो खत्म हो जाते हैं ना. और एक बार वो बैरियर्स खत्म होते हैं तो उनका एक्सपोजर जो है वो बहुत ज्यादा हो जाता है, उनकी वल्नरेबिलिटी बहुत ज्यादा हो जाती है. तो जनजाति ऐसा नहीं है कि आप कहीं कंदरा में जाएंगे तब आपको जनजातियां मिलेंगी. यू जस्ट हैव टू वॉक अराउंड. जो इतना कंस्ट्रक्शन वर्क हो रहा है अपने देश में, बहुत सी सड़कें बन रही हैं हमारे यहाँ, तो बनारस में तो एक तरह से कहा जाए तो पूरा ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन ही हो रहा है. फ्लाईओवर्स हैं, और हमारी तो यूनिवर्सिटीज में ही बहुत सी बिल्डिंग्स बन रही हैं. हर दिन शाम को अगर आप टहलने निकलिए तो आपको ऐसी औरतें मिलेंगी जिनके बच्चे, जिनको स्कूल में होना चाहिए, वो उनके कंधों पर लटके होंगे, जिनके हाथ पैर धूल से सने होंगे, जिनकी शायद कोई सोशल सिक्योरिटी नहीं होगी, और जो इसलिए काम कर रही हैं कि जहां उनको रह करके, और वो एक वो नहीं है, इट्स विशफुल थिंकिंग कि आप कंदमूल खा के रह रहे हैं, मगर जहां जिस ट्रेडिशनल वे में उनको रहने की आदत है वहां से वो अपरूट कर दी गई है. तो उनकी जो रोल एक्सपेक्टेशंस हैं वो तो वही है सोसाइटी से, कि अगर बच्चा है, बच्चा तो बाप का भी होता है, तो जिम्मेदारी तो माँ की है. तो उनके जो रोल एक्सपेक्टेशंस हैं वो वही बने हुए हैं, और उनकी जो फैसिलिटीज हैं और उनकी जो घर की सुविधाएं हैं, जो परंपराएं हैं, वो बिल्कुल आपने अपरूट कर दी हैं और बदल दी हैं. तो दे आर पीपल हु आर डबली एक्सप्लॉइटेड. तो देखिए, संघर्ष तो सबका है. हम नहीं कहते हैं कि सिर्फ महिलाओं का ही संघर्ष है, पुरुषों का भी उतना ही संघर्ष है, एक तबके के पुरुषों का. मगर उसी तबके के पुरुषों की तुलना में उसी तबके की महिलाओं का संघर्ष मेरे विचार में क्या, एकेडमिकली रिसर्चर्स हैव प्रूवन दैट इट इज फार मोर एज कंपेयर्ड टू मेन.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Gitanjali Gogoi is asking, ma'am, do you think that a time will come when women would not be fighting for equality and justice anymore after so many initiatives and struggles have been made for the same?
I don't think there will be a time that women will no longer be striving for justice. I have immense faith in the strength of women, in the resilience of women, and I have immense kind of confidence in the future generation, the generation that was raised in believing that they are equal, to ensure that whenever injustice will come to them, they will stand up and they will fight, they will unite, they will establish a network, and they will kind of try to focus the attention of people in these areas where it gets obliterated. So I don't think women will be ever disappointed. And there again, I'll revert back to my initial observations that women as such per se are very diverse and very segmented. When I see the lady who helps me run this household, her niece working as if she was the lady of the house, or as if she was the responsible person of the house, in the morning, in cooking and cleaning, and then trying to study something, to read something, and her two nephews literally sitting in their beds and playing with their smartphones. I really don't really know what to do. I feel infuriated. But again, when I talk to her and when she goes to this organization, it's not an organization actually, it's a group which has been put together by some of us to educate these children during Corona times. I feel that there is hope. She is conscious of her rights, and one can only kind of support this spark in them, not to take things lying down, to question, to protest, to resent, to petition. So I don't think that this whole initiative will die away.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And another question, Dr. Mandeep Kaur. She is asking, what is the role of women in present film industry? And don't you think present movies are degrading the role of women in the society?
Yes and no. Yes and no. Why? Because, there's a time that I would think that they were degrading society, women, like when women are used for obscene purposes. Yes, it degrades women. One of my research scholars has actually written a huge piece for this book about which I was talking, Women Activism and Politics, how they were being, their representation being so obscene. But then you have films like Pink, and you have films, I'm not a very avid film watcher, but some of them I see and I find that they are bringing about, like, films like Thappad, films like Pink, these two films that I've seen. They at no point of time, I feel, are degrading women. So there is this, I wouldn't say alternative cinema. They did very well on the box office also. So they were not alternative cinema. They are very much mainstream cinema. And they have tried to bring in the positive role of women. It is through these women characters that the narrative goes forward. Like this film, in this film Pink, the climax is that one of the proponents says that, yes, we did agree to go with them. We did. And then eventually there was a dispute about the payment. Fine. And she says, what's wrong in that if we agreed to do this? We have a right to do it. So, assertively, quietly bringing this logic forward. Or in Thappad, where the main role simply says, no, I'm not going to bring in any extra charges on my husband, but I'm not going to take this Thappad also lying down. So I don't think women are being degraded. Or maybe because I don't watch very many films, I don't know about those films that are degrading women. I'm once again, the answer to this perhaps lies in methodology. That who are you asking this question, and how it is getting reflected? How is it getting responded? So my response to this would be that, for instance, on acid attacks, there is this film which was brought out. What was the name of that film? Perhaps Chapak. And the heroine is, who was the woman who was behind this movement? The cases of acid attacks between 14 and 18 have been very, very many, enormous. But women have taken up this initiative, and acid attacks have been, selling of acids in the Kirana shops has been declared illegal. But despite that, Kirana shops sell them, and despite that, these episodes happen. But you cannot simply, kind of ignore the effort of this person. I think she was Agarwal or somebody. I shared the stage with her a couple of years ago when the IIT-BHU had invited her to give her applause for the work which she was doing. So although there are almost 2,000 cases of acid attacks, yet the struggle continues against that. And this struggle is a struggle, they are given rights under the Rights of Persons with Disability Act in 2016. And the Supreme Court has issued directives that made it mandatory for private and public hospitals to treat acid attack victims for free. The question also is, to what an extent these resolutions or orders have been made common knowledge, that when unfortunately a family turns up with the acid attack victim, is the family aware that she should be given free treatment, or is the hospital aware that they should not charge anything from them? But this is, there are so many sections that are in place. Section 326A, 326B under IPC, the Criminal Law Amendment Act, which was passed in 2013. I know about all these things because I have, kind of worked on this in this area. And still, the implementation part is lacking, and that is somewhere where the loopholes are, and that's somewhere that the ladai has to continue. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. One more question I am taking, ma'am.
I said I'll pause here and take some questions before I can wrap up.
Ma'am Subramaniam is asking, rural women highly neglected. Why, madam?
Essentially because despite the focus on rural women, there isn't that plenty in the villages. There are women not only in the villages are neglected, but women in the urban spaces are also neglected. And there are lesser schemes for the urban women as compared to schemes in the rural India. For instance, there is Manrega for the rural area, but there's no Manrega for the urban areas. There is free ration for the poor across the rural area. For the urban area, it is although available, but is not secured as much. So again, the poverty in the rural areas is far more manifest as compared to poverty in the urban areas. Yes, job opportunities, earning capacities in the rural areas are lower, but then they're not that satisfactory either in the urban areas. So the schemes that are very much there in the rural areas, for instance, the Anganwadi workers or the Asha workers, these are small opportunities, but at least they are there for women in the rural areas. Compared to them in the urban areas, they're left to themselves. If you're living in an urban or what is known as the urban area, you could open a parlor, you could go work in your neighbor's house as a maid. But the government schemes in the urban areas are far too less as compared to the rural areas.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Ma'am Stuti is asking, many of the women are still not aware of their rights and the society. They have accepted the dominance they face every day. That what is that taught to them since childhood? How that can be changed?
By teaching them from childhood, by people like you and me to have voluntary, to commit our time, our slices of our lives to make them aware about it, to ensure that these messages get spread. And one needs to also look at the brighter side. Small initiatives, like for instance, making the eldest woman of the household as the mukhya of the family is one initiative. Giving them money under the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana rather than the man is another initiative. Making sure that whenever there is a displacement, instead of giving cash to the man, you make arrangements for the alternate habilitation of these people. So these are the things that are the initiatives that have improved the situation of women. And when the woman says that, yes, her name is on the family house, on the registers, she gets a sense of not only entitlement, but also authority. And naturally, violence against her gets to the decline. So there are smaller women's movements across the country. And these smaller women movements are not always recorded, but these movements are movements that are smaller battles that aim at winning the war. I mean, when I use this metaphor of battle and war. I'm not saying that there's a war going on there, but the tension, the challenge which we have here is something which is extremely important and has throughout been extremely important in the role of women in society and politics. I mean, the slot that was mentioned by the organizers that I picked up was the role of women in society and politics. And what I'm trying to prove here is that it is not simply a flat, static role. It is a role which is a constantly innovative role, which is a constantly changing role, which is a role which has all through been that of a very severe engagement kind of a role. And this is something which is maturing. I don't say, and I'm not being complacent about it. I'm extremely conscious of the fact that women are still way too behind. And there are so many women who are not even conscious of their rights. However, this is something which is far improving. Today, when a woman says that I don't want to do it, I'm not doing this. Why? Because I don't want to do it. She's not questioned the way it was questioned 40 years ago. And as if, she was questioned that you're not entitled to have a mind of your own. You're supposed to go by the traditions of the family, or you're supposed to go by the traditions of you have to conform to the normative standards of the society. Today, people take note of this. And that is something which is extremely important. And that is something to reckon with, that this is something where we stand now. And in this sense, to my mind, yes, there have been, say, for instance, even after Nirbhaya, there have been so many cases of rape that have taken place. Shakti Mill case of 2013, in which a 22-year-old photographer was raped by 5 people, and then similarly the Badaun gang rape case that resulted in the rape of 2 young Dalit girls. No, there weren't protests that happened there. And why they didn't happen? Because people have to get along with their lives. Similarly, very recently, the Unnao rape case of 17, where it was where a young girl was raped by one of the MLAs of a ruling party, had a nationwide protest and nationwide outrage. The protesters not only protested in Delhi, but they also protested in Unnao. And rape was definitely a very severe case. In Banaras Hindu University on the campus, there was a case of molestation some 4 years ago in 2017, September. And women not only protested against it, they ensured that the then Vice Chancellor was not only questioned, but was shown the gate, and the rules of, so-called, securing women and making the campus safe for women are changed. So, this is just in keeping with all those efforts which were in place. At the same time, we're also aware that even shocking protests like, Manipur women going naked against AFSPA, the law still continues, and there has been no amendments to it. Similarly, about the Myra Paibis, yes, they are brought in history books, and we talk in laudatory terms about them, but we hardly, see that a major dent is made there in terms of a substantial change coming in. However, when you compare it with, say, 50 years ago, you feel that, yes, we have made some progress. But this is an inequality that has come through centuries. And to expect just decades change it is not happening. It is a continuous initiative that needs to keep progressing. One is only happy that in most of the countries, I don't say in all the countries, but in most of the countries, there is a global consensus that women's role in the society needs to be brought about and needs to be made more positive. And here I think there is also the globalization and the privatization and the Bretton Woods institutions that are working in favor of it. You know how does one reach that diagnosis? You keep a woman in the house and her productivity and her contribution to the GDP remains extremely limited. When you bring her out, in addition to the work that she does at home, she's also adding in concrete terms, in terms of generating money, cash, and thereby the productivity of a nation or of the world increases. So therefore, also to my mind, there is almost a consensus amongst states to come forward and confirm to this that yes, women needs to be encouraged and supported and ensured that they are equal partners in the society, and they are and this can only happen when there is no domestic violence, when there is no violence in the streets. However, there are overlooked issues of empowerment as well. And these overlooked issues are, say, for instance, I just mentioned AFSPA, Armed Forces Security Act, a weapon and militarization of women. Then, by India not opting for the budgetary allocation of women under the CEDAW, then wider range of economic gaps that the country has, and there are so many things that need attention. And by way of conclusion, I can only say that we have witnessed overwhelming participation of Indian women activists. Their constant and aggressive demand for justice has led to the enactment of several laws in the country. And as I said, law bana dene se kaam nahi chalta hai. Aap practice mein usko kitna secure kar rahe hain, kitna aap usko implement kar rahe hain, ye zyada important hai. Time and again, Indian feminists have drawn attention to the facts and consequences of various discriminatory happenings in the society, of violence against women. और उनका जो इंटरवेंशन है उसने हमारे परसेप्शन को बदला है. उन्होंने हमारे परसेप्शन को ऐसे बदला है कि people at least think about it. When Sheila Dikshit said, great woman as she was, that इतनी रात को घर के बाहर निकलने की क्या जरूरत थी? There was a whole questioning across the country. A small little, a comparatively smaller city like that of Banaras was having night marches. My younger colleagues would march the streets of Banaras at 12 o'clock with their candles saying that we are reclaiming the night. तो इस किस्म की जो जागरूकता है वो बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है, और वो हर गली, हर मोहल्ले, हर समाज में, चाहे वो शहरी हो चाहे ग्रामीण हो, उसमें उसको करने की जरूरत है. And one can bring about innumerable examples from the rural India where initiatives were taken and where superstitions were put at rest, where we're doing this research project to study the impact of digital education on women. And to our utter surprise, the project was entitled Gender Discrimination. And in the urban areas, we are finding that this kind of discrimination is almost non-existent in at least 3 cities of the country, Kolkata, Banaras, and Delhi. But in the rural areas, this discrimination still continues. So yes, there is, some kind of discrimination there. But as far as the government is concerned, these are extraordinary times, and we haven't had in living memory any such experience. Eventually, one can simply say that sensitizing the society towards the women and their needs can be a very remarkable step towards maintaining gender equality. And in this, patriarchy is to be questioned, which is deeply, deeply entrenched in the Indian society. And therefore, efforts should be made to be beyond gender stereotyping. So that's all I would like to say by way of conclusion, I suppose.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Participants are writing lovely lecture, ma'am. It was a pleasure to listen to you. Awesome lecture or सार गर्भित व्याख्यान. enlightening insights and enriching and thought-provoking lecture. So many comments, ma'am, are coming from the participant sides. And now I would like to invite Nidhi to give a formal vote of thanks. Nidhi. Nidhi, are you there? I don't think so. So, ma'am, thank you so much for giving us your valuable time, and your lecture was awesome, really. And I learned so much from your lecture, and so many examples and so many questions you answered. जितना भी मैम आपने बोला, जितने भी सारे आंसर्स किए, तो उससे बहुत कुछ मुझे लगता है सारे हमारे पार्टिसिपेंट्स ने बहुत कुछ लर्न किया होगा, और बहुत 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 हमारे लिए एनलाइटनिंग था ये वाला लेक्चर मैम. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for inviting me and for your patience. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Now we can take some other questions from the participant sides. Hello. So participants को problem था कि feedback form जो है वो कल नहीं आया, तो feedback form inaugural session का नहीं था. So आज आपको feedback form सब कुछ मिलेगा, but portal पर मिलेगा RC MOOCs पर. जिनको login करने में problem आ रही है तो वो अपनी दूसरी ID बनाकर भी login कर सकते हैं, और अगर तभी भी नहीं होती है तो आप अपना forgot password का जो option है उसमें जाकर भी आप अपना login दोबारा से कर सकते हैं. So अगर कोई प्रॉब्लम और होगी तो आप हमें मेल पर भी लिख सकते हैं, आपकी प्रॉब्लम सॉर्ट आउट हो जाएगी. एंड फीडबैक फॉर्म का ही सबसे ज्यादा लिखा था. आरसी मूक्स पर आपको लॉगिन जरूर करना है, बिकॉज ऑल द असाइनमेंट्स, फीडबैक फॉर्म, क्विज क्वेश्चंस all would be there only on the portal. So rcmoocs.in, fm.rcmoocs.in, which is the portal name. You have to go there and log in, and then you can find out your quizzes, questions, feedback form, assignments, everything would be there. So thank you all of you. निधि, क्या हम अब लीव कर सकते हैं?
Yes, ma'am. If the session is over, we can close the session now.
Yeah.